Hi, guys. Welcome to Periodic Conversations. My name is Sarah Juliet, and I'm your host for today. And we have the wonderful Brianna MacLean with us as well. So, today we're going to be talking about gender identity, which I know is a very sticky topic to discuss, but both of us identifying as cisgender, bisexual women have somewhat of an understanding of where some people with gender identity issues would come from. But of course, not a full understanding, and we want to get that out there from the get-go that obviously we don't know all, and this is just a conversation that we're having between two cisgender bisexual women. So welcome, Brianna.
Hi, thank you for having me back.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So where should we get started? Should we get started on teaching people exactly what the acronym is? That is the most updated acronym.
Yeah, absolutely. So I get to any chance to break out my gender studies degree. So currently in North America, the acronym is, if we're doing the long version, it's 2S LGBTQIA+. Though typically the easier way to do it is LGBTQ+. That plus sign holds a lot in it. And basically what's covered in that nowadays is two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer/questioning, intersex, and asexual. And basically the acronym represents the either queer community or rainbow community or whatever you want to call it. My personal favorite is the alphabet mafia. And it's basically what is used to describe LGBTQ plus people.
I love that. I don't think I've heard of Alphabet Mafia yet, and I really love it.
Yeah, no, it's a fun one. I like to break it out, and people tend to get a good response out of it. But yeah, basically it covers the vast range of sexualities and genders or yeah, it's pretty much the majority. It's sexuality, but we do have some gender and biological sex identifications in there, and yeah, it just covers that broad and ever-growing community.
Yeah, which I love, and I really enjoy how these are topics of conversation that are topics of conversation nowadays when they definitely didn't used to be. I would say what, maybe
No,
like 20 years ago, it was not a topic that was being tossed around
no,
between friends, you know?
it was still something that was not, in most honest terms, it wasn't always safe to talk about. I mean, just speaking on Canada, we've only had same-sex marriage legalized since 2005, which, while not the earliest, it definitely wasn't too long ago. So
Yeah.
the fact that it is a conversation that can be had more comfortably nowadays, even though, like, unfortunately, there does seem to be a anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric that's growing. Unfortunately, I know that Statistics Canada reported, and I want to say this past December, that in Canada alone, hate crimes based on sexual orientation has risen over 60% between 2019 and 2022, 2020 numbers. This is why I was a social sciences major, not a math major. It was from 2019 to 2021. Hate crimes based on sexual orientation have risen in Canada over 60%. So it's really important to continue having these conversations.
Definitely. Oh, that's too bad. That's a really large like percentage increase. I can't believe
Yeah.
that.
No, it's a huge, I want to say they said it was the highest level in 5 years. And
Wow.
it's unfortunately, it's not just Canada, it's all of North America. Unfortunately, it seemed that the Trump administration being in power gave a lot of people with some more negative ideologies a platform to talk, or at the very least, a platform that they're not scared to be a part of anymore. It's just become more and more mainstream, which is really unfortunate because we've taken so many steps forward. So the fact that there is this push now, this very, very conservative push to kind of take steps back is just, it's unfortunate. And a lot of people, like, I know freedom of speech is very important, but sometimes freedom of speech can be incredibly harmful. So in these cases, it's why it's important to have as many positive conversations as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, definitely. And that's exactly what we want to do here today too. Is to speak more about gender dysphoria and gender or sex gender and then sexuality as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the thing is like, I mean, I went to school for gender studies and I also did anthropology, and I focused primarily on social and cultural anthropology. So it was something that I definitely experienced a lot in school, but for a lot of people, they aren't in these like intensive classes. And so a lot of the topics are new to people, or at the very least, they just don't know every single little detail.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's just common. I mean, it makes me think of how there's some critiques about the Barbie movie that came out last month, and how some people were like, yeah, it's very feminism 101. Like they could have done more. And it's like, it's not even a 2 hour long movie. Like you aren't going to get the entire intro to feminist class done in 2 hours. And for some people, this was the first time they had patriarchy and feminism kind of explained to them in a easy to digest way. So it's a success, even if they did they go into all intersectionality and discuss the intersections between gender and race and gender and sexuality? No, but it's a starting point. And for a lot of people, a starting point is what's needed.
Mm-hmm. I unfortunately can't speak on that because I haven't seen it yet, but I finally have come out with my Barbie outfit, so I'm ready for the film.
Yes, you need to go.
Yes, I definitely will.
I keep going. The people at the theater are starting to recognize me.
How many times have you went and saw it?
3.
No
And
way.
I'm going again. I'm going again this week. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so great. I love that.
Yeah. Well, I think they only recognize me because I only have the one Barbie shirt that I just keep wearing. So they're like, oh, it's her again. She just keeps showing up.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, that's great. Well, good for you. I mean, hey,
Yeah.
you know what? If it's that great of a movie, I will see it more than once as well then
Oh
too.
yeah. Definitely recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I know that was a big topic, was that it's like, well, it's very basic feminism, and it's like, yeah, but it's also a major motion picture that was like being marketed to the masses. Like the fact that it was as feminist a message as we got is pretty revolutionary. So it's a thing. It's like people like to trash talk kind of the intro and the basics, and it's like, not basics for some people are not basics for others. Like some people don't have that experience. Like not everyone was the same as me, who I went to school for gender and feminism and women's studies. So yeah, I had intro to feminism in school, but that doesn't mean that everyone else did. So
yeah. Oh, for sure. And then it's nice to just have something that's, like you said, for the masses.
exactly. Easily digestible. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Like if
Exactly.
anything, you want to get that intro so that people get interested in going beyond the intro, which is why talks about it. When I was in university, I did a lot of work with Firefly in schools, where we went into schools to talk about sex, gender, and identity. And we had to make it as easily digestible as we could, because depending on the classes we were going in, it was their first exposure to all of these things.
Yeah. That's really cool, actually. How long did you do that for?
Well, I did it as part of a class at first, because you could kind of volunteer and do work experience, and get to kind of talk about that for a class. And I loved it so much that I basically kept pestering them, and I stayed on until they closed down the campus in March 2020 for COVID. So I did it right up until they closed the campus for 2.5 years, I believe.
Nice.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And it's a wonderful program, and the people running it are amazing. So
is it still available?
I believe it is. I would have to double check, but I believe they're still doing it.
And it's called Firefly?
Yeah, Firefly in schools.
Firefly in
Yeah.
schools.
They
Okay,
also had
cool.
Firefly Camp, where it was like a camp for
Mm.
LGBTQ plus youth. And yeah, I am fortunately, despite being born and raised in Alberta, I'm not a camper. So that was a no-go. I'll stay in the schools. Do not make me go into the wilderness.
Understandable. I'm sure I could get you out of your shell. We could do it. We could do it
Just,
together.
like, just let me have a cabin. I just needed plumbing. I can do a cabin. Just
Okay.
don't make me use an outhouse. That's my one thing.
Just like the biggest fear that you have is an outhouse.
They're horrifying. I can't do it.
Oh, that's great. So, getting back on track here.
Yes.
Let's talk about sex, gender versus sexuality.
Yes. So uh basically the easiest way to think about it is sex, just basic sex. That is the biological. It is the sex you're assigned at birth. I'm going to be quoting one of my favorite professors from cultural anthropology. But she always described it as the bits you're born with. And it's male, female, or intersex, where that's someone who's born with either genitals, chromosomes, or reproductive organs that don't strictly fit into the male female sex binary. So it's when you're born, the doctor lifts you up. It's like, it's a boy, it's a girl. That's sex. Gender is the socially constructed roles that are assigned based on biological sex. So man, woman, other. And we typically grow up with the idea that a person's gender is determined by their sex, and therefore is this strict and binary thing. This is actually not the case. So gender identity is basically how we feel about our own gender. So how much you feel like a man or how much you feel like a woman or something else. And it's very much a spectrum. It's not an either or, it's a spectrum. I talk about spectrums a lot when I'm on here. So it's very much a spectrum. So say if you're a cisgendered person like you and I, our gender identity matches the sex that we were assigned at birth. So we are cisgendered women, we were born female, and we identify as women. Whereas someone who is transgender, their gender identity does not match the sex that they were assigned at birth. So someone who is born male might not feel like a man. They might feel like a woman. And they're two very different things. And if you don't feel like either of the offered or any, it's not even either, it's if any of the gender identities that are offered to you, you don't feel like that fits, then you could identify as agender. Or if you feel like you don't strictly identify as either a man, woman, but kind of flow between, then you could identify as non-binary. And then this is also different from expression, which is how you perform gender, basically. If we're going to quote, say, Judith Butler, if you're performing gender. So it's what's visible about your gender to the world and how you're presenting to the world. So that could be how you dress, how you walk, how you talk, act, etc. And some gendered aspects, such as like hair, clothing, makeup, and all that, it can change from day to day. And just, it's basically how, you're presenting your identified gender to the world. So, and these can all change. The thing with gender is it's very, it changes with time. Yeah, well, let's gender identity and just genders in general, like it varies from time period to time period or culture to culture. Like it evolves with times. Like you can think about how, like in pre-World War II North America, for years upon years, the typical color for boys was pink and the typical color for girls was blue. But this is since switched, where it's like, well, now pink is for girls and blue is for boys. But that always wasn't the case. Or I get to break out my heritage. In Scotland for years, the men wore tartans and plaids, which nowadays it's like, oh, well, it's men wearing a skirt. Well, at the time, that was seen as in like basically peak masculinity. That was very much a part of their heritage, right up until, England invaded and banned it. But and then you look at today where it's like men in skirts is seen as something controversial because that doesn't, in their minds, men wearing skirts does not match the appropriate gender roles. And it's just something that changes from, or doesn't so much change, it does change over time. Like I was saying with the pink and the blue, it does evolve with the times and it does change. And then from culture to culture, what is seen as masculine in one culture might not be seen as masculine in the other. So it's very, it varies from place to place, which is why it's not as strict a binary as a lot of people grow up believing it is.
Yeah.
And then when we get to sexuality, in the words of my very English professor, it was who you fancy. That is the attraction you feel to people, whether it be physical or sexual or emotional. That's just always the way I always think of it, because she always said it in the most beautiful posh accent. It's who you fancy.
I love it.
So right, I love it. I was obsessed with her. Still slightly am. But yeah, that's basically, you can get into your sexual orientation. So gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, demisexual, asexual, heterosexual. And I mean, there's many more than that, but those typically tend to be like, it's a doing thing that's like a base camp, and then you can kind of spread out from there. But that seems to be the typical. And it's like, yeah, that's the difference, is like sex and sexuality are not the same thing. They're not inherently tied to each other. The same way that sex and gender aren't inherently tied to each other, because I mean, it's all three of them. It's something that you can kind of flow between, and they can evolve, and there's no like, well, if you're one, you're this, and if you're this, you're that. It's very much, I'll say it again, spectrum.
Yeah.
So that's like the basic differences between sex, gender, and sexuality.
Okay. You explained that really well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was done very well. And I think it's kind of like what is it? I don't even know what to say, like gender identity for dummies, like.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
At least that's how I felt with it, because we did have that chat earlier, and I was like, all right, Brianna, I was like, you need to kind of sort of give me the lowdown of what we're talking about today. Yeah. And that was, you explained that very well. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Something else that I wanted to bring up too is back in Greek and Roman culture, how being gay back then was completely normal. And
exactly.
It was like the people wouldn't even turn their heads once. And
yeah, it was just a part of culture, and it's something that's definitely nowadays, like when you look into Greek and Roman culture, it's something that nowadays is very straight washed. They don't like to talk about it just because it was so part of the norm. And it's the same way that just in North America, there's this like idealization of ancient Greek and Roman culture, and anything that doesn't fit within this very contemporary mindset, they don't like to talk about. I mean, it's the same way that when they found, I don't know if you know this, when they found the original Roman statues of people, it did not fit this idea of this like classic ideal time, because all of the cultures, or all of the statues were very brightly painted. And if you go and Google the pictures of what these statues look like painted, like they basically look like theme park attractions, like very bright colors, but that didn't match this very sanitized idea of this culture that we had. So they started scrubbing off the paint, and that's why all these statues are just kind of white now. So it's very similar to what you do with the stories. I mean, it's actually funny. I was talking to a friend about this yesterday. How I don't know if you were a big Orlando Bloom fan back in the day.
Oh, totally.
Oh yeah.
Orlando. My gosh.
So I remember watching Troy as a like young person, and in the Troy movie from like 2000, my God, I'm going to age myself, like 2003, 2004. So I was like 12. I was far too young to be watching it, but Orlando was there. So my mom rented it because in my mind, he was my future husband. But
sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But you watch it, and so Battle of Troy, you have Achilles there, and you have Achilles and Patroclus, who in the movie are portrayed as cousins. And then you get into the actual mythology and the stories where it is more, a little bit more than implied that they were lovers. But you couldn't have had that portrayed in this movie from the early 2000s because, I mean, heaven forbid Brad Pitt be playing a queer character. I mean,
Yeah.
you look back at Interview with the Vampire even, and it's like, despite that book having basically like peak queer undertones, like they made it as straight as you humanly could. But it wasn't something until I learned until years later when I was reading more into Greek mythology, and it's like, oh, not his cousin, wasn't his cousin. But that's the thing, is this very queer mindset, and or the not mindset, but this these queer undertones and queer storytelling was something that does not fit into this very, I'm gonna call it what it is. It's a very basic, but not basic. Straight-washed. It's a very straight-washed history of ancient Greek and Roman culture, which was very queer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you see in some sort of other films and whatnot, like the series, and I don't really have names, but other sorts of series where there is, I don't know, that type of interaction between men and women, and or sorry, women and women and men and men, and
Yeah.
like, that's not, it's not a problem at all. But you'll see it in other sorts of, but I guess they're not exactly representing Greek and Roman culture. Like for example, The Witcher. It's
Yeah.
something that like it's like it's a throwback within to like medieval times,
Yeah.
essentially,
Yeah.
and they have all that sort of, you know, gay, lesbian in there as well.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of interesting. So there's plenty of films that have that, but it doesn't seem like they're blockbuster films.
No, it's something that's still an issue. I mean, it's something that's we're talking about a lot right now because so many, um, if like we're staying on the topic of shows, so many shows nowadays that feature prominent queer characters or romances are getting canceled left and right. I mean, there's an issue right now about how Amazon Prime, despite having renewed A League of Our Own, which was a very queer positive show with a very good queer romance in it, it had initially been renewed for kind of a send-off season. It wasn't a full season. It was going to be kind of a, we're going to end the storyline for you. And they've already since revoked that renewal.
Oh wow.
So they're not going to be doing that anymore. And oh God, one that hurts me dearly was I loved on Disney Plus. They did the show sequel for Willow, where the main romance in that is between two women. And it was only canceled after a season. And that was something that there was a lot of pushback because it was marketed as being for like a family show, and heaven forbid a family show feature two women in love.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I'm forever gonna mourn that. And there's so many. It's just unfortunately become very typical that
Yeah.
queer shows are like they're constantly at risk. And then it makes no sense because a lot of them do really well, or even queer movies. I know right now, for sticking with Amazon Prime, they just put out Red, White, and Royal Blue, which features um, two men in love.
Mhm.
And it's been one of the top 3 things on their platform since they put it out last week. Like it's doing very well. But then within the same week, they canceled one of their top queer shows. And it's
Wow.
just,
You have to
yeah,
wonder, like it's 2023. Why is there so much pushback on all of this still?
and it
It's
seems like
just,
it's growing. Like
it's
it's
strange.
unfortunate. It's unfortunate that the sentiment's growing that. And I think that's what it is there's the sentiment that, well, what about the children? And it's like,
But
what about
the
the children? The
children are
children
going,
shouldn't be
yeah,
exposed. Like,
yeah.
it's
They
like
should be,
it's not grooming, because
yeah.
that seems to be the word thrown around a lot, is that like, oh, you're grooming children. It's like
What?
exposing them to queer people isn't grooming. Like they are going to come across a gay person here and there. Like it's not like they're
Well,
unicorns. You're not going to magically come across one. Like they're people living their day-to-day lives.
and also, what if there's a little boy who's like 6 years old and he doesn't feel like a little boy,
Exactly.
you know?
And it's
And
like,
that should
I
be able to
mean,
be acceptable. Children should be
like
able to see those things and understand, like, hey, it's okay if I actually want to love a man or if I want to love a woman, because there's actually nothing wrong with that. Because you can't choose. Who
exactly.
you love is who you love.
Exactly. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people, if something like, say, She-Ra, which ends with it features multiple queer characters and it ends with like the main couple being two
Mhm.
women. If I had had that growing up, I would have realized that I wasn't straight like long before my 20s. Like
Well,
I I
yes.
look back in the day and it's like I thought that my fixation on Keira Knightley was just because I wanted to be her, not that I wanted to date her, because I didn't know any better.
And mine as for Avril Lavigne.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
It's like,
totally. Yeah.
yeah. It's
But
like
yeah.
it's
Or
like
yeah, go ahead.
we're being exposed to heterosexual couples all the time, and that doesn't seem as grooming at all, because that's just seen as the norm.
It is. And it's like, when is it going to become the norm that, you know, LGBTQ plus communities can be a norm? Like,
Exactly.
for example, that there could be shows where somebody is two spirited.
It's that would be amazing. I don't know if
That would
there's
be
any,
so cool.
yeah, I don't know any personally. I watch a lot of TV, but I definitely can't say I know like every single show that's on right now. So if there
Yeah.
are shows that feature two-spirited characters, I would love to see that, because right now it's
Yeah.
like you're and even if we look at shows nowadays, like it is a very it's the same when I was here talking about autistic representation. A lot of it is a very narrow perception of LGBTQ plus. And I mean, it's better than nothing, but we should be expanding these portrayals, because I mean, someone out there should or would it could help somebody
Yeah.
seeing themselves on a screen.
Totally. Well, just like for myself recently coming out and seeing all the pushback that's come from it. And meanwhile, it's like, well, no, you're not. You're not bisexual. How could you be bisexual? You've never dated a woman before. You've never been interested in women. And I was like, but wait, I just never told you that I was interested in women because of the pushback that I thought that was coming against me. I thought I was only ever supposed to marry a man. I thought that it wasn't okay if I was with a woman, and that, my life would look so different.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And but your family wants you to have a life that looks that certain way, like the little tiny, Disney princess, and how she's going to be with the man at the very end of the day. When how great would it be if little girls and little boys could see that they have other options in this life and they're not um shamed for feeling
Yeah.
those ways.
But if there was a lack of this, like, if there was more equality in our media, as opposed to like, there seems to, and it's coming back, unfortunately, but like, there's this compulsory heterosexuality and this push for heteronormativity where it's like,
Mhm.
this is normal and everything else is other. And it's like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could treat them all as equally?
Totally.
It's like,
Yeah.
that's the thing where it's like, people are like, oh, well, queer people are asking for too much. They want like everything to be gay now. It's like, no, I would just like to see more representation in my TV and my movies.
Yeah.
Like a little bit, little. I'm asking for nothing. A
Your
nugget.
face right now. But it's true though. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. Yeah, just a little bit more representation. So
a
I
little bit.
actually feel like I'm like held and understood a little bit more.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
I
like
agree.
it's it's asking for so little, but for some people, it's like I don't know. It's like trying to think of the wording, but it's like when you've been in a position of privilege your whole life, equality seems like you're being persecuted.
Okay, I'm gonna here, periodic conversation listeners. I'm just going to stop this recording and restart another one so we can have a part two.